All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 1883 Speaker Series. My name is Mike Wozniak, and I serve as the coordinator of leadership and programming in the Student Involvement and Parent Programs Office. In the next 18 minutes and 83 seconds, we'll learn a new lesson on leadership, as well as some advice to guide our personal and professional development. For today's speaker, please join me in welcoming the Vice President of Public Safety and the Chief of the UND Police Department, Rodney Clark.
Well, thank you, everybody. We got a promotion there. Wishful thinking, right? Maybe something's in the tea leaves. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. It's honored to be here today and chosen to speak. I've looked back through the weeks and looked at a few of these, all the way from when President Armacost did these and Dr. Malloy, and realized that we've been going since 2023. And I think Mike was telling me we're at the tail end here. So I'll be maybe one of the last 3 or 4 people to go. So what do you do at this point, right? When you're on 2 calendar years and people have talked about leadership, what do? How do you change your message or be more dynamic? I'll refer to my notes here some. I wrote some notes down, but there's nothing new under the sun, right? You've probably heard that before. It's just a way of repackaging things. Every now and then you will get some original thought and content that comes out of somebody, but if you think about it, it's a great form of, kind of a copycat society and listen to each other's messages. So what I've done today, and I've tried to incorporate the photos because the presentation with photographs is something better than just looking at words or just hearing somebody speak. So I've tried to put some photographs in here, and some of them pertain to the message that I'm seeing, some more than others. I try to make a tie to that. I tried to look at this as I just sat down, I think, over the last couple weeks, and we've had a busy week this week, a lot of things going on. We had, unfortunately, a kid hit out on the streets and stuff like that, and trying to run that down, and just some other issues and stuff going on. But luckily, being prepared, I started probably about 3 weeks ago and started thinking of what would I talk about, right? If I just came down and talked about some certain principles, and that's what I'm going to do here today. And a big theme is you don't have to know a national celebrity or somebody famous or somebody that has national stature to be a leader, right? And I'm going to talk about some of those people today, regular people that I've come across in my life, and a lot of it transposes a military career and some of it a police career, so that's what you'll see, a lot of things like kind of wrapped up into that messaging. And I also tried to say, what would I tell my own daughter, right? If I was giving a presentation and I wanted to say, like, hey, here's some things that I've seen, to try and be successful in life. And I think it all, starts that. If you can kind of think of that, I'm going to come back to that theme, right? That kind of, yes, you can interface with national leaders. And that's kind of, my first slide here has, Attorney General Barr from the first Trump administration. That's the pinnacle of law enforcement leadership in the United States, right? So that's a national level leader, right? So he came to Wichita State, which is why that's a different uniform, and had some advice and things that were going on in the country. That's your national level leadership. But down below is my own daughter, right? And things start small, and hopefully they go on to greater things as you progress over time. And that's a little achievement of hers. I think it says Student of the Month. That's probably me coming home from work, when she got it. That's been some years gone by now. But that's just an example. I'm going to meet the Attorney General one time in my life, right? I'll probably never meet another Attorney General of the United States again. But the people that I come in contact with on a daily basis, or that they come in contact with me, that's who you can learn from. And there's people that can give you right examples, and there are certainly people that can give you wrong examples, and I've seen both. All right, so just kind of remember that, the family theme. I think we'll return to that in the end. So after I told you that regular people make a big influence in your life, what do? I start out with a national level figure, right? But I think this was a good quote from Ronald Reagan, and it says, the greatest leader is not necessarily the one who does the greatest thing. He's the one that gets the people to do the greatest thing. And I think, to summarize something that's kind of leadership defined, if you was to think about a sports analogy like a quarterback on the offense, right? He's trying to get everybody going in the right direction. And he's trying to, work that offense, right, down the field, to gain territory, to do missions, to produce new things, hopefully to score too, right? So That's kind of like, what I think about like Ronald Reagan and, kind of an analogy using it that way, that you can't do it all yourself, right? And that's where some of these wrong people that I've come across in my life, not necessarily wrong people, but when they do things the wrong way, they're trying to do like everything themselves. Delegation is something that is mastered over time, right? It doesn't mean you're relieved of the responsibility for it, but you have to empower like other people to do certain things, or else your department or your unit will fail for sure. Okay, so the first thing, the first lesson that applies to all things in life is know your audience, right? So if I'm preparing to come here today, who am I talking to, right? I also know that these are recorded online. They'll live in infamy forever. So, there's an online, presence out there, and I wanted to say that, or teach, it used to be in the language, this was about students, right? And like I said, what would I inform my own daughter of? What would I inform a young person of from lessons learned over time, like about leadership? And that's the first thing, know your audience. Read the room. I can't say this enough. I see people that read the room well, and I see people that don't read the room well, right? Your message is off point to who you're talking to. You want to try and avoid that if you can, right? That's where a lot of mistakes are made. If you're not communicating the right way for the situation, then a lot of the message is lost, right? Why are you speaking? What's the purpose of it, right? We all know like what the purpose of this is, but hopefully it's to convey something. In leadership, it's to convey your beliefs or your principles, or to get people going in the right direction, to try and influence people. I've kind of put on there, do you know what you're talking about? And why I put are you sure under it is to emphasize the point, right? How many times, you don't have to take my example, but people in your life from school or things like that, that they'll talk about anything under the sun, but they have no idea of what they're talking about. People realize that. People realize that quickly, right? Authenticity is not something you can go home and practice, right? I'm going to be more authentic. That's why you see politicians fail and stuff like that when they have like a fake message, is because they don't come across as authentic. Whoever you are, be that, and be yourself, right? Don't try and fake something, or, because people, even somebody that doesn't have a high formal education or something like that, they can feel and they can smell authenticity. And they can smell when it's not there as well. So the other thing, tell your story. This is something, as a retired Army officer, they always used to tell us, right? Tell your Army story, right? That's what you're doing. Recruiting is one thing, a recruiter's office, or trying to get people to join the military, but they want real people to go out, like retired officers. Tell your Army story, right? And to people that are online here today, part of reading the room, I see a lot of faculty and staff in here. I see a few of what I think might be students, but for later on, right, if this is captured online, that's the message, that I'd want to convey. I mean, in my opinion, I'm a little bit biased, but there's been no greater influence in my life, and I don't know if there's any greater place that you could learn leadership skills from being in a military branch, right? That's where I picked up a lot of my stuff, obviously, and just lessons learned, what to do and what not to do. So tell your story, why it's important to you. In this picture right here, this was taken in South Korea. I don't remember the exact years, but the man in the center there is Lieutenant Colonel Hawes, right? I'm going to talk about him a little bit today. Probably, like I said, you could talk about national figures and stuff like that, but some type of real person that probably influenced me a lot was Colonel Hawes. He was Irish, rough, corrected people on the spot, would tear you up, but then later on put his arm around you and said that he loved you. Was one of the most giving people that I knew. The other man there was Sergeant Major Green. I served with him twice in Oklahoma and then South Korea. This is when we were all running military police for the 2nd Infantry Division over there. But also a good man, but not as great of an influence in my life, I think, as Colonel Hawes. So we'll have a couple lessons about him as well as we move along here. I am watching the time, try and hit my target. All right, another one, we got that, know your audience, and we got share hardship with your people, right? What does that mean? It could mean simple things, right? This is a picture of me when I was at Wichita State University. After I retired from the Army, had 22 years, and I did all my time in military police, right? So I had went through a police academy already, but the state of Kansas says, well, now you got to go through a police academy because we don't care about what you did in the Army. If I was in North Dakota first, which I interviewed for a job in the region before I went to Kansas, I wouldn't have had to do that because they have kind of a reciprocity agreement. But share hardship with your people. Do you think it meant something? Those are two of my officers there. That was, last I knew, Sergeant Matthew Blades, and that's Officer Miranda Haney, right? We went through the police academy together. And do you think it means something to them to see their leader going through the same training that they do? It's not about me. It doesn't matter who you are. But yes, it does. So all the trials and tribulations that they go through, you go through too. Show presence in your style, right? I have that in here. Make people feel something sometimes when you walk into the room, right? That would be my advice to young people, right? There's so many people nowadays that just blend in and they kind of go with the crowd and they don't really have like what you'd call like a presence, right? So that would be one of my things that you want to work towards. And I don't think that I have it totally down yet as well, but that's something that I strive for, is like to have presence so that during those important moments when you speak, like people listen. That second one there, being there, matters more than almost anything else. If you was to ask me on a list of principles, like what's more important, like intelligence, endurance, or select your other adjectives, it's endurance, it's showing up every day, it's being there for your people, having presence, right? Showing up matters. It matters almost more than anything else, and it's the thing that people will notice more than anything else. During COVID, right, that's kind of the second picture down there is me standing with one of my officers during COVID times. It was the very first part of that. And, I was at one of the things that COVID taught me as a university is that almost during COVID times, you could almost do anything that you wanted to do, right, and nobody really cared. I had a boss at the time, the vice president for finance administration. He kind of had the belief too. He was a military guy, and he's like, if I have people here, then I'm here. But if he wanted to say like, hey, I'll pack it in, I'll work from home, and you guys got it at the university, like he could have done that. Nobody would have cared. Nobody was paying attention or doing a lot at those times. I'm talking about back at the other university. But he didn't, right? He set an example, right? And I try and set an example too. I never, just something simple as showing up, like didn't miss a day during that time, right? Was always there, because there was a lot of fear during that time too, right? And whether you're right or wrong, when you're in a position, like people look to your position for guidance, right? Whether you're right or wrong, even if you're like could be a bad leader, people will eventually figure that out, but they're still going to look to you to like, what should we do? And a lot of people were scared during that time, like scared. We didn't know what COVID was. People thought, maybe they'd breathe something in and then drop dead like the next day or in 2 days. So we were all working through it together. Look like a leader, have courage, do the right thing. Look the part is probably 80% of the game. We used to tell the young lieutenants in the Army, when you first get in the military, you're not going to have a lot to offer. What you do have to offer is your physical fitness, how you look, how you present yourself, because your image matters, right? You're not going to have a lot of wisdom because you'll pick that up over time. And it's funny because as your wisdom gains, right, your body kind of deteriorates. So it's like an inverse like relationship, right? Maybe the young man that you once were, or the young woman that you once were, slips away. And what you have left is your mind. All right, so the next principle, meet people where they are, right? I think about recognition and recognizing people, and I'm going to come back to this theme too, but these are a couple pictures. That was Sergeant Tureen at Wichita State University in the top picture. He was like one of my best sergeants in the whole department. And he got a job at the Kansas Law Enforcement Academy, naturally, right? He was like a good sergeant, and he went on to be an instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Academy. So that was, I think, the day that he left. And I made sure to see him off right. I think that's important, right? Give somebody a plaque or recognition for their service in days gone by. I think that's a real important thing to do. Some of these other like sub-principles, everyone's not the same. They don't perform the same. They don't produce the same outcomes. It'll be up to you to get the desired results, right? So you can't have an unrealistic expectation sometimes, is what I've found, that everybody is going to give you everything that you need, right? It's your job to get out of them what you need, right? It's your job to motivate, set the climate, that there's a good working environment, and meet people where they are, right? Kind of that last sub-bullet, knowing that you're receiving the best person can give. It has to be enough, right? If I know in my mind that I'm getting the best out of you, then I know in my mind I'm getting the best out of you. I can't push you anymore, right? Knowing where that is the detailed part, right? I can say that first statement, but knowing where that is the detailed part, and you have to be honest. And that's something that probably takes years to cultivate. I mean, you can't just figure that out, right? You got to kind of see people where they are and see what you're going to get out of them. Again, the theme, you don't have to be a national leader to learn things from people, right? These are all like real people. This gentleman down here in the bottom picture is Sergeant Kevin Hawkins, right? And he was kind of a favorite of mine. He was entertaining, right? He always had something to say. He is, I'm sorry, when I speak about people in the past tense or whatever, he's a very large man, right? Sometimes to the detriment of, it made it difficult for him to do things as a police officer, but he loved being a police officer. Absolutely loved being a police officer. And, you know, kind of meeting people where they are. I think this photograph is at a Martin Luther King Day Jr. event, right, at Wichita State University. Meant a lot to him because he was in an organization called NOBLE, right? NOBLE is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And he believed in that organization. He came up and asked me, like, hey, sir, can I go to the national conference in Louisiana? And we were talking one day, and he was bold, like just asked things right out of the blue. So I said, well, yeah, tell me what it's about. And he told me what it's about. I said, yeah, sure, Sergeant Hawkins, that sounds like a good cause. And why don't you go down there? And I said, you know, I got to hand it to you. Like a lot of people don't. They won't come up to me and ask me for things. He goes, but you always do. You always come up and ask me for things. And he said, sir, quiet mouths don't get fed. And I learned that, and that stuck with me. Like where if you don't ask for something. And he had a rough upbringing. He is from St. Louis, and kind of grew up in a rough neighborhood. And he and I used to chat about that. And last time I knew, I think he's still there. He is at Oregon State University right now as a sergeant on their police force. So somebody that I was happy that I crossed paths with. All right, try to know what is a crisis and what is not, right? You have this term a lot, like a manufactured crisis. You know, we tend to do that, right? Not everything is a crisis, but some people tend to think differently, right? Run around all the time worrying about like little things, when the thing that you should be worried about, like you're totally off base, right? You should be looking someone else. That's just kind of a pearl of wisdom from over time. Avoid acting on first reports. First reports of an incident are almost always wrong. The refinement or the details comes in usually much after the fact. So take the first report, take it for what it's worth, but then kind of, you know, try and refine your process and try and see if you can figure out more what's going on. It's kind of an advice that I would have to a young leader, right? Which is what this is supposed to be about. When it's your time to make a decision, make one. Avoid being indecisive. That's so important, right? Almost as important as being there every day and showing up is, you know, be decisive. You know, kind of a theme on this is what's a crisis and what's not. I think when I was looking at these two photographs here, the top photo is me when I was an ROTC instructor at a university. We have to go to summer training with cadets from all over the nation, right? And these are two cadets here that I'm in the center of. The next photo below that is two combat-hardened sergeants, right? Infantrymen had served in Afghanistan and in Iraq and had a little bit, you know, there's a little bit different. I kind of juxtapose those pictures there, right? Do you think a crisis to the top picture is a crisis to the bottom picture? And it's through no fault of their own, but it just is, right? It's, again, knowing the situation that you're in, right? The guys in the picture there with me, they've seen, like, just about everything. And in time, too, maybe in the top picture, they'll see just about everything, but they're not right at that moment, right? So I remember the thing that they think is a crisis is not necessarily a crisis, and you need to just think about that in leadership. All right, so kind of sticking with the theme, real-life examples. You know, there's national leaders, and then there is what it is, right? The people that you've met in your life. You don't need a history book to find role models. The bigger picture there with me and two Korean gentlemen, and that's Colonel Hawes in the middle. The guy in the way back was named Mr. So. He was our interpreter in the unit, right? So when we needed to deal with the South Koreans, he would come out and speak their language and kind of help us out with things. That guy is a Vietnam veteran, though. I saw a picture of him when he was younger, and we talked about it during my 2 years there, you know, because he was there the whole time. He had been in some interesting stuff. You know, there weren't a lot of South Koreans that served in Vietnam alongside U.S. forces, but he was one of them. And he had some things to say. and a very interesting man. A good leader. Obviously, English was a second language, so sometimes like communicating with him, you have to kind of parse that out and kind of go over things a couple times to make sure you're getting the right things that he told me. But it's an interesting turn of phrase, too. He used to say, I think in this picture here, he's probably like 75, 80 years old. But he'd say, man, Mr. So, don't you think about, like, you should retire? And he goes, I did retire. He goes, I retired from the Korean military, and what retire means to me is it's time to change the tire. You get it? You retire. You put a new tire on, and you keep going, and you do something else in your life, right? And I was like, God, if this guy, and he still walked straight and everything. He was still pretty fit, for his age. But I've always remembered that too, retire, right? Time to change the tire, do something else, kind of a leadership lesson. The gentleman in the middle there that's in his police dress uniform, that is Chief now, Guy Schroeder. He replaced me when I left Wichita. He was one of my captains at the time. I had 2 captains. But you talk about, you don't have to be in a higher position for somebody to be your mentor. It works like the other way around too. This guy was like a warrior cop, right? I mean, grew up in the late 70s and 80s as a police officer. Wichita had some heinous like race riots. He was there taking bricks, taking bottles, taking gunfire. Narcotics officer, motorcycle officer, fully decorated. I think he's on his 44th year now as a police officer. So I took a lot from him too. Probably since I retired from the military, he's probably the guy that I took the most from. The tiny picture at the bottom there, his name is Colonel Mintz. That little icon next to him is Kenny Walks Across America. After he retired out of the Army, his mom, he was one of these guys that posts a lot on Facebook, right? So he kind of chronicled his whole mother's like demise and eventual death from cancer. And it was very touching, but he decided to walk across the United States, right? So he started in Washington, D.C. He would walk about 20 miles every day. He had a support van with him that different people knew he would drive and stuff, so he'd have change of socks, shoes. Did about 20 miles a day, got somewhere to sleep at night, and then got up and did another 20 miles again. I can't remember if it took him 7 months or something to cross the United States, but he eventually made it to San Diego, which is where he's from. So, and he did all this to kind of raise money for veterans and also for the type of cancer that his mom had. I can't remember what the color purple's for, or I would say it for you. But that's him. That's a picture of him. And when he was doing that, he was training, in where he lives in Pennsylvania. He would train every day and walk a certain amount of times. And that's a picture of Jack the donkey. He said he used to meet Jack the donkey on his walks and talk to him and stuff like that. And just today, I looked again to see if there was any updates. He was on a walk, and now he says, I'm proud to be here with Jack the donkey's sons. And there's like 3 donkeys next to him and stuff. So I know I'm over time. I'll pick it up here. Finally, Colonel Hawes, that's him there, kind of in the Army dress uniform with his tombstone. So he was very influential. I was with him in Korea for about a year, and you remember when I talked about good and bad examples of leadership? The guy that he replaced was kind of somebody that you did not want to be. I could remember one time he expected us to have the Jeep filled up, so that he could go up to Seoul or whatnot for a meeting. And then because we didn't have it, he threw a temper tantrum, and I could remember standing out there on the curbside as he peeled out with his tires and gravel coming up and hitting my uniform and stuff like that. And I kind of just looked at myself, and I'm like, well, I guess that happened. And, I'll go back inside. But the day that Colonel Hawes came, greeted me with a hug. Unfortunately, years after that, it wasn't anything combat related, but he was just taking his son to school, had a massive heart attack, and died right there in the car. So his wife had informed me about it, some years later and everything. So that's kind of, I went online and, found his tombstone and got it there. So just, again, examples of everyday leaders. You don't need a history book to find a role model. Another principle, when it's time to make a decision, then make one. Indecision is a cancer to an organization. A lot of times even a bad decision is better than no decision at all, right? Because at least a bad decision you can learn from. If you don't do anything, you're just sitting there with the same set of circumstances happening over and over again. So that's kind of a piece of advice as well. Avoid the analysis paralysis or the working group solution. I know I went back and looked at Carla's briefing, and one of the things she said was how things in higher education like take a long time, and sometimes how that's frustrating, right? And I sometimes feel the same way, right? How we study a lot of things before we make decisions. And I think that picture's appropriate because that was my probably last photo when I retired, right? So when it's time to retire, know it's time to retire and make that decision as well. People give you signals, so look for them. It's your job as a leader not to be adrift, to say something and do something. Don't be afraid of confrontation. I think that's one thing that Colonel Hawes taught me. You know, he was a very confrontational person when he needed to be, but supported his people. Ask why someone is the way they are and try and figure them out. That's a picture there with my brother and sister in 1995, I think, when I graduated Air Force basic training. Your brother and sister may be, for some people, is people that knows you the best, right? Maybe not for some people, but if you're in tune with people and know their signals, right, I think that you don't always look at things from your own perspective in your own mind, right? Try and get outside of your mind. Think about why somebody else is doing the things that they do. All right, so will you be the same over time, right? At the end of your leadership journey, or does time change you? Like, odds are you won't be the same person that you were a long time ago. If you are, then you probably haven't done something right? Like you probably haven't learned from your mistakes and learned from other things. I think the picture on my left is when I was 26 or 27 years old, and that's in Alabama when I had just become an officer. Not the same person in the middle there. That was my last day in the Army. So I had my daughter with me. I was at a university like this. I had to go to the nearest base to out-process and everything. So I got there, you know, it was just me and her at the time. So I dropped her off at daycare. I went and did all my out-processing stuff, came back to the daycare. I took my Army uniform off in a bathroom inside of a daycare. Because I was at a university, you know, not anybody's fault or whatever, but there's no retirement ceremony or nothing like that. And I thought at the time, like, how undignified that was after 22 years. And for things like that, when Sergeant Tureen was leaving and things like that, I try and make it a point when people are leaving to give them a send-off, right? Because I know what it feels like. Same thing, just another picture young in my career. And then now, you know, with my wife, Anna, who's in the audience, and my daughter, I probably should have met her a lot younger, maybe when I was like 20 years old, but that would have put her at 11, so that wouldn't have been right. Maybe 30 years old, then she would have been 21, and that would have been better. But, you know, the point is, the overall point is you're not the same person over time, and you're going to change. And now finally, this is the last slide, I promise. I know I've went like way over time. But, like I said to the first slide, right, you won't meet celebrities or national level figures. You'll meet people in your life, and you'll learn things from them. Right? You can develop your own set of principles that works for you. Finally, I think, you know, I showed a picture with the Attorney General, and then my daughter. You know, out of the two people, I wouldn't want to tell the Attorney General anything, but I'd want to tell my daughter something for the future. So I kind of took this. I've liked this from time to time. I've heard military pastors say it at ceremonies and things like that. This is General MacArthur's letter to his son when he was the Pacific Theater Commander in Australia at the time, World War II era. He wrote a letter to his son, and I'll read it here. And although it's his son, right, you can substitute language for a daughter, or you can think about your child, right, and you can use it both ways. But this is what he said. Build me a son, O Lord, who will be strong enough to know when he is weak and brave enough to face himself when he is afraid. One who will be proud and unbending in honest defeat and humble and gentle in victory. Build me a son whose wishes will not take the place of deeds, a son who will know thee, and that to know himself is the foundation stone of knowledge. Lead him, I pray, not into the path of ease and comfort, but under the stress and spur of difficulties and challenge. Here let him learn to stand up in the storm. Here let him learn compassion for those who fail. Build me a son whose heart will be clean, whose goal will be high, a son will master himself before he seeks to master other men, one who will reach into the future yet never forget the past. And after all these things are his, give him, I pray, enough of sense of humor so that he may always be serious, yet never take himself too seriously. Give him humility so that he may always remember the simplicity of true greatness, the open mind of true wisdom, and the meekness of true strength. Then I, as his father, will dare to whisper, I have not lived in vain. And I think, there's a lot of things that you could find, inspirational quotes or whatever, but that's something kind of in keeping with the theme of people that you know in your life, right, are more important than national figures or celebrities and things of that nature. So I honestly can't remember do we do questions and answers, or do we just end it, right? I'm looking at the timer, and it's about to hit 30 minutes, so, yeah. But thank you everyone for coming, yeah. All right.
Thank you, Chief Clark.
And
All right. And thanks to all of you again for attending. Join us April 16th when we welcome the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, Dr. Shelby Whitty, for a talk on everyday leadership. Have a great rest of your week.